Well, a new report has revealed the catastrophic economic impact foot and mouth disease would have if it entered Australia. The report released by Regional Development Australia Central predicts it would deliver a $1.1 billion hit to the Queensland economy alone and a loss of around 34,000 jobs. Farmers remain divided on border closures and whether they're necessary at this time. But some are calling for tougher government measures to protect the livestock industry. Joining me live is the Nationals leader, David Littleproud. First, let's go to this report. $1.1 billion, that's just to Queensland. Do you think it's actually much bigger than that?
Well, it is. That's just for central Queensland.
Right,
This would cost Australians $80 billion, and that's just the upfront cost. Then you're going to pay every time you go to the checkout. There'd be no dairy, there'd be no meat products. We would have to import them. So the costs are going to go up. Despite what the Western Australian Agricultural Minister says that it's all hokey-dory and it'll be okay, prices will actually go down. That's a disgraceful thing that she said. I mean, so disrespectful to farmers whose livelihoods would be lost. So this is the big challenge, is that's just one area. And this is why we need a government that is decisive. We've had 3 weeks of indecision about putting mats in. He said it wasn't a great idea, shouldn't do it, then all of a sudden backflipped. We've had tens of thousands of people that have come through our borders that have walked through that could have had it on the bottom of their feet. And they put dogs in, but the dogs can't sniff FMD on the bottom of someone's boot. So you are putting at risk, at jeopardy, $80 billion, nearly the same as JobKeeper, and the ongoing costs for every consumer. This is just a government that has lost control of its borders. You're seeing that there are people coming through saying they're not even being asked, challenged, even though they've declared. It just goes to show within 8 weeks they've created a biosecurity crisis that could cost not just Australian agriculture, it could cost every Australian. And this is what you have when you get a government that isn't in control of borders, doesn't have a mindset of protecting our borders, but also protecting agriculture.
What is your position at the moment, though? Because we just heard from Michaela Cash. She said the coalition's position is that it's up to Labor to decide. So what is the position?
Well, it is, because that's where you get the advice. And Peter Dutton and I got a briefing from the department. And we asked...
What did they say?
Well, we asked, what is the threshold? And the Chief Veterinary Officer made it clear. The trajectory of this disease in Indonesia is growing. It's not diminishing. They don't have control over it. We've gone from 22 provinces of the 34 now, and that continues to grow. Then where is the precipice that we would cross, that we would say we need to temporarily close those borders? And that's what we're saying to the government. The department can only give that advice to the government.
So what did they tell you? Did you ask that question?
We did, but they won't tell us that. And that's not a reflection on the department, because they can only give that advice to the government. But the government needs to be transparent with us, but also Indonesia. They're saying this will impact our trade. Well, it will, if we're not transparent with Indonesia and saying, at this juncture, we will have crossed the precipice where we may need to buy you some time in Indonesia to get measures and to contain it, and our border measures in place. But be open and honest with them, because that's your best way to protect trade. But to just simply say, no, we're not going to do it because it's going to hurt trade, doesn't give confidence in agricultural sector in regional Australia. It's creating a vacuum where this anxiety is being created because there's been inaction by a government that has basically dithered. And we're saying there's now some more measures. After seeing that briefing, I was frightened. And so we should be stopping any person coming in with foodstuff from Indonesia. New Zealand did it about 2 hours after we announced that that's what we should do. New Zealand's put these measures in place, but we seem to be 3 weeks behind. We're going to put vaccines on the ground. We haven't seen any vaccines put out yet. So how slow is this government in acting on a crisis? This is the time for leadership. This is the time for the Prime Minister to take over. In Indonesia, the President has. He's taken control of this, and it's time now that the National Security Committee and the Prime Minister took over. Otherwise, it's not just going to cost Australian agriculture, it's going to cost you, and it cost you a lot.
But are we getting into territory here on a more macro level where as soon as there's a threat that could permeate our borders, we just shut down? I mean, that is a really risky thing. And I think, you know, is this a hangover from COVID where we stopped our own citizens for coming home, we shut the borders? Surely you're looking at this going, we can't be in that environment now.
No, so there's a difference in this one. And the opposition is saying, well, we've had foot and mouth disease cases in other parts of the world when we were in government. They're right, but not to our nearest neighbour, and not to the one where the sheer scale of movement of people, it gives us the concern that we have now. Now, if there's other countries where they've had it, we can mitigate it. But when you've got our nearest neighbour and you've got the number of people, 1.3 million people...
What does shutting the border actually mean, David? Does it mean shutting the border just for travellers, or does it mean shutting off trade?
Well, this is where you can simply have a scale of measures within those border controls, whether it's non-essential travel, whether it's all travel altogether for a period of time, and it's not permanent. And this is the thing that everyone needs to appreciate. It would be temporary to allow Indonesia to catch up and to be able to contain.
But ideologically, I mean, you're talking about limiting the free movement of people. That doesn't seem very libertarian to me.
It's not, but nor does $80 billion,
Sure.
in my opinion, in
Yeah.
our industry. And so that's where science needs to predicate where we go. And that's all we're saying is be open and honest with everybody. Tell us what the science is. And if you tell us what that is, and you're transparent about where that threshold question comes into whether we may need to do that, then we're comfortable with that. But you've also got to get our borders intact. And the problem has been is we've created a crisis. This government's been there 8 weeks. And in that 8 weeks, they've created a biosecurity crisis at our borders. I mean, imagine what's going to happen in 8 months.
Do you not fund biosecurity enough in the budgets?
More than
the
more
9
than
budgets
enough.
you had.
Record spending under our government, $1.1 billion.
It's not what the NFF said. Tony Marr said to me last week, it's 1 year you can get a couple of million, the next year, it's not at the same level.
Well, that's wrong, and Tony knows that very well. In fact, Tony's...
He also says don't shut the border too.
Well, with respect, he can have his opinion, but we're saying predicated by science, not by the fact of just saying we're going to lose out on trade. You won't lose out on trade if you predicate on science. That's what all WTO rules are predicated on. Tony Marr should know that better than anybody. So if you're open and transparent, then you're able to demonstrate this is the juncture. But with respect to funding, our funding has gone up because we could see the evolving threat. The funding model is going to change to a cost recovery model to those that create the greatest risk. That's what we're always going to. So with respect, I think the NFF, who don't really represent everyday farmers, their membership aren't everyday farmers, need to understand there is a lot of anxiety out there because there's been a vacuum created by government.
But again,
paralysed by inaction.
We're looking again to the big hand of government. I mean, we heard Murray Watt say this morning, travellers just need to do the right thing. They need to be aware, give their shoes over if they need to. Don't bring meat products back. That's true, isn't it? That's how you're going to beat this thing
It is, but they don't always do it. And what he's not telling you is there is always a percentage, a cohort of those that come back that falsely declare or unintentionally undeclare products that they should have there. And so you can't trust this just while there's a heightened risk. And that's about the precautionary principle of saying, while there's a short-term period of getting containment over there, we get a lens on this, we can help them with vaccines, then why don't we take the precautionary principles, but tell us what that threshold point is. And when they won't tell us that, it creates a vacuum of anxiety.
What do you think that threshold point is?
Well, this is the science. This is where the science comes into it. And this comes back to the inaction that they've taken in protecting our borders. So it's two-pronged in making sure they've got the protection mechanisms here.
But I mean, you're in power 8 weeks ago. You know about this disease. You know how it gets out. You know what the travellers are. I mean, you've got to have a bit of an idea.
Well, I could tell you within 4 weeks ago, I got a briefing, and within 20 minutes of that briefing, I could determine that we needed foot mats and foot baths. And that was a simple thing.
When would you determine the border needs to be shut for trade or travel?
Well, this is where we need to have a lens on what's happening in Indonesia. So it's not just on our borders in making sure we've ramped up and we're not just waving people through and there's chaos.
So is there a number of cases, you think, if it hit?
Well, that's where it's two-pronged. So it's on our borders and then it's in Indonesia. And the good thing is when Lumpy Skin hit, when we were in government, we sent officers on the ground. So we do have people on the ground that gives us that data, that lens on what is happening on the ground. And if we can get a lens of where the trajectory is still going up and going in a way across a number of more provinces that would really concern us and they can't contain it, then there will be a juncture where they will have done an analysis of where that trigger point is. And that's what we're saying. Tell us what that trigger point is, be open, transparent, but instead they've had rife with inaction, with indecision, and it's just creating anxiety for people whose livelihoods depend on this. But every Australian's got to understand it's going to hurt them. They're going to pay at the checkout for a long time to come because you just don't recreate stock straight away. You've got to get through a breeding cycle.
Add it to the list. Exactly. All right. David Littleproud, good to see you. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, mate.
We are